Joining us now, Republican candidate, Commonwealth attorney for Henrico County, Shannon Dillon. She's got a couple of Republicans. She is trying to be the nominee. That'll be decided on June 9th, and whoever wins will go up against incumbent Shannon Taylor. So it could be Shannon versus Shannon. It could be a Shannon-off. Shannon, it could be a Shannon-off. I like that. I just made that up. Shannon, good to have you with us.
Thanks so much for having me, John.
Okay, now, Shannon.
Yes, sir.
Henrico Commonwealth's attorney. This is a pretty big job.
It is.
It's a pretty big deal, and we all know kind of how Shannon Taylor got in there, because normally this would be a Republican seat, and a very unfortunate set of circumstances on the Republican side. Bang. Shannon Taylor's a Commonwealth's attorney. Now, tell us about Shannon Dillon and why you decided to get in this race.
Well, I graduated at Florida State Law School in 2000, and from there I entered the United States Navy, and I was a JAG for about 4.5 years active duty. Spent that 4.5 years prosecuting military folks. I was also hand-selected to be the battle JAG when we invaded in 2003. Unfortunately, there were some issues with that, and so I didn't get to deploy, but I did, however, get to serve as the Special Assistant United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia in the Norfolk office. And so I spent 2 years doing that, so I prosecuted as a federal prosecutor. And then I came to Henrico County, and I prosecuted here as a Commonwealth attorney in Henrico. And then I decided to go into private practice. So I've been a defense attorney for the last 8 years. But I'm the only candidate running right now that, one, has any military background. But I've prosecuted and defended in military, federal, and state courts. And I've also spent an enormous amount of time in the juvenile courts. And I think that that's one of the areas that, at least according to the newspapers and Newsweek, we are seriously lacking in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Can you elaborate on that, Shannon?
Well, I think the fact that we were brought up, I believe it was Newsweek, on how many kids we put in front of judges. I think that there are better ways to handle the juvenile courts. I also think that we need to exercise a little bit more discretion. Additionally, I think that if we start addressing children at a much younger age, so rather than waiting until middle school or high school when they've already been approached by the gang issues or they've already started drinking or started to use drugs, if we start getting to the kids in the elementary schools and giving them outlets other than the streets and bad peer influences, and we start, giving them hope instead of, like I said, negative influences, I think that we'll have a better chance of keeping them not only out of the courts, but I think that we'll stop the matriculation or at least slow down the matriculation into the adult courts. It's the one area that we have the ability to actually influence and maybe impact the crime rates in the Commonwealth.
So what would you do if you were Commonwealth's attorney from Henrico, Shannon Dillon? What would you specifically do differently than the Democratic incumbent, Shannon Taylor?
Well, I'd be in the office. Quite honestly, I think one of the things that's failing is there's just a lack of leadership. It's difficult to lead when you're not around. I think that people tend to want to follow a leader who's willing to do the same thing that they're doing. I think that it's incumbent on the Commonwealth's attorney to spend time in the courtroom, not only to familiarize himself or herself with what the current trends are from the courts, but to also demonstrate to the judiciary that you're serious about not only your office, but also leading your more junior attorneys. There's no mentoring program for the junior attorneys. There's a lot of very young attorneys there who are not, quite honestly, trained on how to try cases. And I think that there needs to be additional training, not only just training in how to try a case, but staying on top of not only the trends nationwide, but the court decisions that are coming out that are impacting how the courts are responding to search and seizure or juveniles. A lot of things change daily, and we need to, as an office, be on top of those trends. And Ms. Taylor doesn't spend a lot of time in her courtrooms, so she doesn't have the face-to-face contact with the judges, with the police officers. And it's okay to talk to the chief of police, but there's a lot of police officers who would like to probably have some time with her. She needs to be in the office. The office is open from 8 until 4:30. It's important that, as a servant to the county, that you be in your office doing the job that you're paid to do.
So what you're saying is the number one thing Shannon Taylor needs to do is show up for work?
Well, she may show up, but I don't think that she's doing the job that she was hired to do.
Now, Dillon, Shannon Taylor has come under fire when she got in there for basically, shall we say, cleaning house. She let go the majority of the prosecuting attorneys that were there. When she came in with a new regime, a lot of people thought she lost institutional knowledge. If you were to be Commonwealth's attorney, would you do the same thing?
No. And quite frankly, I was shocked at the firing. Certainly everybody's going to bring in, one or two people to have their own regime. But at St. Paul's Baptist Church just the other day, she was talking about the reason why she fired everybody is because they didn't share her vision. But I'm not sure what vision that would be. These were career prosecutors who had over 100 years of prosecutorial experience amongst them. And to let them go, they were not only probably the most seasoned, but probably the most talented of the entire office. And for no reason except for, as she said, they didn't share her vision. The vision of the Commonwealth's office is to prosecute cases fairly across the board. And I'm not sure what other vision that would have been. So, no, I don't think that a mass firing is appropriate, but I do think that holding people accountable and raising the standard and expecting the staff to rise to that challenge, I think is appropriate.
Well, a lot of people thought that she did that just for political purposes at the expense of really the office. Do you share that view?
I think she hurt the office, and I think that her first act in office questioned her credibility and questioned her competency. So I do think that she hurt the office very badly when she did that.
Common Sense News Time 9:19. This is the John Fredericks Show across Virginia. We're with Shannon Dillon, Republican candidate, Henrico, Commonwealth's attorney. There's three people in this race. Mr. Everhart, Tony Pham, and Shannon Dillon. This is going to be decided in a Republican primary in 8 days on June 9th. One of them will win and face off against Democrat incumbent Shannon Taylor. Why should you be the Republican candidate to take on Shannon Taylor and not them?
Well, again, quite honestly, to run this office, you need to have some prosecutorial experience, and that's one issue that Mr. Everhart doesn't have. Is although he's a fine attorney, and quite frankly, he is a fine attorney. I've worked with him for the last 8-9 years, and he's a very good defense attorney. But there's a difference between prosecuting and defending. And yes, it's about putting together a case, but there's more to it. And when you take over the office, you have to be ready to go from day one. And with me, there's no learning curve. I've done it, and I did it at every level. So I don't need a learning curve for the juvenile prosecution. I don't need a learning curve for the circuit, and I certainly don't need a learning curve for the general district court. Mr. Pham's biggest problem is he hasn't been in a courtroom in almost 10 years. He spent the last, I believe it's 8 or 9 years, working for the Richmond City Jail and working for the Democratic sheriff there. And quite honestly, things have changed over the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. He does not have the experience to walk in and take over the office from day one. Again, it's a matter of being in a courtroom and knowing the trends and knowing the police officers and having that already built-in trust. at one of the GOP breakfasts, they were talking about there's a way to do things, and then there's the Henrico way. Henrico does things vastly different. Mr. Pham's only experience in prosecution is in the city of Richmond. The city of Richmond does not prosecute cases the same way that Henrico County does.
Why? What's different?
And Henrico County's tougher, and people are held a little bit more accountable. We don't deal as much away. It's not as easy a forum to get plea negotiations. We don't do written plea agreements, and our courts want to make the decisions. We cannot hog-tie or tie the hands of our courts. They do not like that. They are the judiciary, and that's their job. The Office of the Commonwealth is to present a case. So there are just things that are just handled differently. And again, when you haven't been in a courtroom in over 10 years, it's difficult to say that you're going to be able to walk in and do it instantly. I mean, even traffic laws are changing, so it's being on top of that. And quite honestly, I don't believe, like I said, as seasoned as Jeff is as a defense attorney, he's not seasoned as a prosecutor. And Mr. Pham hasn't been in a courtroom in so long. I don't think that he would be somebody who could take the office from day one and run it from day one. There would be a significant learning curve for both of them.
Let's get Shannon Dillon to politics. One of you three is going to have to take on Democrat incumbent Shannon Taylor. On paper, this should be a Republican constitutional office. Why do you think you're the best candidate to unseat Shannon Taylor?
Well, I think it would be an interesting race. As you had joked when you first started this, Shannon v. Shannon certainly would make it interesting. But I think that when you go resume to resume, I think that Shannon Taylor is in the same position that Mr. Pham is in, and it just lacks the experience. I think that, quite honestly, it would be easier for me to take her on because I have the advantage of it being more of, I guess, viewed as a fair fight, girl versus girl. But quite honestly, I think that it would be an interesting fight just to see how things panned out. I was at a forum with her the other day. She spent a lot of time talking about programs that the county runs, not a whole lot about what she's done. And there's so much that she is lacking and so much that she has failed in doing that I think that, quite honestly, depending on how the voters take it on, I think that the Shannon v. Shannon race would certainly be an interesting one.
Well, I'll say this for you, Shannon Dillon. You're certainly a compelling candidate, no question. Thanks for being with us.